Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour to be a part of the program. It is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624. Send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. So I found myself inspired by Olympia Mike. I would draw your attention 2 episodes ago if you want to hear the interview I had with Olympia Mike, but in it, he outlined his desire and his efforts to bring free computers to people. And he worked with local businesses to pair unused laptops with people that needed them. And there's a friend of mine that's in the area, and he works as a software developer for a company. And he and I got to talking last week or the week before and said, something like that should exist in our area. And so I had the great privilege of having lunch with him today. And we got to sort out some of the details. The reason I'm bringing it on the air is the following. If you have any experience with this, if you've done anything like this, I would love to hear from you at live@asknoahshow.com. Specifically, here's what I'm looking at. There's a couple different routes we can go with this, and we're not really sure exactly how all of the specifics are going to play out. One option is to pair with our local homeless shelter. The thought and the rationale behind that is people that are homeless or need a way not just to get housed, so the shelter works with them to do that, but additionally they work with them to get them employed and do those sorts of things. And in 2025, both of us looked at each other and were like, hey, there is little to no way you would be able to effectively apply for jobs and seek employment in 2025 if you don't have access to a computer. And so the thought there is perhaps that is a really great on-ramp for the people that would need those computers most. And of course, it would be open to anybody if somebody wanted to go over to the shelter and say, hey, I'm looking for a laptop because I'm a student or because I'm this or that. That's option one. Another option so the problem there is as we're kind of sussing it out, what kind of protocol do you put in place? Is it anybody that shows up and asks for it gets a computer? If you do that, are you just going to wind up with some dude or gal who shows up on Thursday when they know that the computers are donated that day and just clears it out every time? Like, what kind of guardrails, if any, do you put in place? Another option we're kicking around is the concept of working with a local food shelter. And the idea there is, they're already providing food to people in need. They're already providing clothing to people in need. And so if you have a community care center that is participating in providing resources to people that are in need, perhaps computers or technology could just be an extension of that. The potential advantage there is, as we were, again, kind of sorting through the actual practical nature of it, you're going to have 2 sides to it. 3 sides, really. The first side is the intake side. So you got to work with businesses, schools, a couple different other places that we've come up with that we think that could donate some of these computers to the cause. The second is the technical phase. So we've kind of arbitrarily drawn a line and said, really what we're looking for is computers newer than 2012. Anything older than computers than 2012 is likely going to be a challenge. It's not that we couldn't get them to work, but it may be a challenge to get them to work and to perform the way that you want them to perform. If you draw that line and you have the intake side, you need a technical phase, somebody to come in, blow the machine away, reload it with either Nixbook or with Endless OS and get it ready for the end user. To do that, you would need space, right? You need, at a minimum, you'd need like a desk and some auxiliary things to have a working space to get all of that to work. And so we're exploring the concept of doing that with the local food pantry, the idea being that they would have a little bit more space and might be able to accommodate, here's an area for dropping the computers off, here's an area for you guys to come in, when you can, volunteer your time, come in, set them up, repurpose them, all the things, and then here's where they would walk back out the door. And that third process is again where I'm going to ask you for your help at live@asknoahshow.com. If you have any experience with this, particularly interested in talking to you if you work with a local charity or if you've done this kind of work, because I'll be honest with you, I'm very ignorant. I'm learning for the first time. Now, as a listener of Ask Noah, you get to learn along with me at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Entire journey is going to be documented. So somebody bestowed a tremendous amount of generosity on me, and it left a huge impact. And now I seek to do that for other people. And so I'm trying to find ways to do that in my community, but I'm getting a little lost in the details. So I could use some help. So my questions, if I were to give them to you in summary, are: what organizations, if any, do you work with? Because there's got to be somebody there to answer the door, somebody there to kind of walk through with people. They may not have a technical stewardship, but perhaps that's where we can offer some input and some advice. Hey, somebody comes in and says, I'm looking to get a computer so that I can fill out a job application. Awesome. What kind of things? Well, I'm doing okay, awesome. That sounds like that would work well inside of Chrome or inside of Firefox. This is a computer. It's going to do all those things for you. Versus I'm applying for a thing and I need to, edit video or do okay, all right. Well, this is probably not going to be, we're going to have to go find a different tool for that job, sort of a thing. How do you navigate that part? Do you draw a line and say, we only take computers that are older than this mark, right? And so we kind of arbitrarily drew a line in 2012, but is that practical? Or should you just take everything? How do you go about evaluating the technical merits of what you have? And then how do you dole them out? How do you put guardrails in place, or do just first come, first serve? So if you have insights on that, I would love to hear from you. Live at AskNoahShow.com. If you happen to be in the Grand Forks, North Dakota area, I would love even more to connect with you as we further down this path. And if you don't live here, I implore you in the strongest possible terms, find an old computer. Find a friend that has an old computer. Find a family member that has an old computer. And reload that sucker with a distro of your choice. If you want to know where to start and don't know where to start, I highly suggest you start at Endless and work your way out. And then let me know how that goes for you at live@asknoahshow.com. There is a deadline coming. The deadline is October of this year. And on October of this year, it is going to get real bad. Well, actually, there's a tremendous opportunity. It's going to get real bad and real good. It's going to get real bad for companies that weren't planning on the upgrade to Windows 11. And as they require TPM 2.0 chips, and computers don't have TPM 2.0 chips, and so thus they're not eligible to run Windows 11. And as organizations begin to require Windows 11, it's going to get real uncomfortable. At the same time, there's a tremendous opportunity for those of us that are open source nerds. Tremendous of opportunity, because there's going to be a lot of computers that are coming onto the market that won't otherwise be used. And rather than see those wind up inside of dumpsters and e-waste and in landfills, I would love for people to rally around this opportunity that we have. Reload those things with Ubuntu, Fedora, NixOS, Endless, whatever it is you want, and get them into the hands of people that will use them. I have barely dabbled into this space by way of, I've taken some computers from some companies that were going to throw them in the trash anyway, reloaded them with Endless and set them on a shelf. I've talked about it on the program before. They flew off. People use them. It doesn't take much when people know what they're after and they want a tool for a job. You have to lower the friction to the point that it becomes the easiest tool in the box. But I got to tell you, as I watch what our children are doing with Chromebooks inside of the public education system, it doesn't take much imagination to figure out that Linux and open source software fundamentally enables those kinds of devices. And as we skate to the lowest common denominator that is the web browser, it becomes increasingly easier to get people into technology, leveraging technology that they can control. And they can absolutely do that with reloaded computers with some sort of open source or Linux operating system. So please work with me as we skate towards this deadline in October to limit the waste that's going to wind up in our landfills, that's going to limit the amount of perfectly good computers that are going to get destroyed or otherwise thrown out, and help pair people with on the other side of the technological divide. They don't have $1,000 to buy a brand new computer. They don't have somebody to walk with them. They need a software stack that they can't stub their toe on. I think that exists in a variety of flavors. The moment, my chosen flavor for that is Endless OS. But I respect the work that people like Olympia Mike are doing with NixOS, and I think there's another really great argument to be made for things like Linux Mint. So whatever your distro choices, whatever your free, whatever your open source software choice is, I'm begging you to go find a computer, reload it, and give it to somebody before October. The solar system. So Last week, I outlined in great detail a project that we were working on to provide camera coverage to a place that otherwise didn't have power and or network access. And I outlined some of the challenges. This week, we had an opportunity to kind of dig in and fix all of the roadblocks that we stubbed our toe on last week and get to a place where everything's working really well. So first things first, let's talk about the good parts. The panel itself is bringing enough power to power everything. So there's enough sun during the day that it puts enough watts into the little battery that the camera, the switch, and the nano beam can send a crystal clear, buttery smooth image back to the main building. So huge success. I talked last week about how we swapped out we didn't swap it out, but we worked around the fact that the solar point wasn't passing any network traffic with a small little switch. So that switch arrived this week. We got it in, worked great. So the next thing became, what are we going to do about the solar point? So I reached out to Unify and said, hey, Ubiquiti had this box, doing this, awkward behavior, all the things. They said, do you have the original packaging? I said, I do not. It was thrown out. I said, okay, well, we can't return it then for you, but what we can do is we can offer you an exchange. So Ubiquiti is in the process of sending us a brand new solar point. We're going to send the broken one back, and we're going to use it as a bit of an R&D practice. Unfortunately, the solar point has kind of burned its bridge with me from the standpoint that I'm no longer comfortable having it in production because I want them to have a good experience. And so far, it hasn't been a great experience, largely because of this one piece of equipment. So we have replaced we've ordered the replacement for the solar point. The solar point has its destiny on its way back to Ubiquiti. A replacement solar point will come in, at which point we'll bring that into the shop, into what we call the sandbox, and we will fire it up and see if we can replicate the problem. The closest I've been able to ascertain, and this is based on one forum post on the internet, there's somebody that made a post, and I'm paraphrasing here, something to the effect of, I found out the hard way what happens if you disconnect the battery while you leave the PV panel connected. So I am assuming, based on that internet post, that for whatever reason, the solar point does not want the photovoltaic cells connected to the charge controller at a time when the battery isn't connected. Now, there's two problems with that. Well, there's more than two problems with that. There's two problems that come immediately to mind to me. The first and most serious of which is, if that is the case, why is that not anywhere in the documentation? Because I will tell you, I didn't come across that, nor did anybody else come across that anywhere in the documentation. Hey, make sure never, ever, ever to have the PV cells connected or the PV panels connected to the charge controller if the battery isn't there. Here's the second problem. What if the battery dies? What if the battery dies? If the PV panels, if true that the PV panel can't be connected to the charge controller without the battery, and the battery dies or is otherwise defective, can't be charged, goes into thermal runaway, whatever the case may be, what happens if I don't have a battery? Outside of the circumstances, outside of my control, what do I do then? And so I don't know the answers to those. I'm going to find out as we get the replacement in. It's being replaced with a Renergy panel. Now, here was the rationale. First of all, the panels that we got from Renergy are awesome. They went in easy. Everything made sense. They worked well. I don't have any complaints. And so we looked and went, it's pardon the expression, but the devil we know, so let's go with it. And so already had the panels, decided to go with the charge controller. Now, I, as I do, reached out to nerds on the internet, and every nerd that deals with solar, I asked, what do you like for solar? And I got, and this is rare, the exact same answer from every single one of them. And the answer, Victron Energy. I got the answer of Victron Energy, everybody from people who install solar professionally, people who live on solar energy, people who dabble in solar energy, people that are do-it-yourself, open source fanatics that want everything available through all of, and the access to all the codes and want to be able to self-host and all the things. Every one of them gave me the same answer. Now, initially, I was a bit confused because when I went to look at when I went to Victron's site to learn more about their controllers, they make a big deal about their Bluetooth connectivity and through their app. If you watch any of their introductory videos, if you look at any of their product documentation, if you look up the charge controller itself, all of it references this app that you're supposed to use to control the solar controller. Now, here's the thing. If you've listened to this program for any length of time, then you know I have zero desire to be glued to a smart device. That's A. Here's B. It's going inside of a shed. So the last thing I want to do is have to go buy some sort of cheap Android device, keep that Android device running, try to keep it up to date, which will be impossible, get their app loaded on it, hope that their app continues to run, and then somehow none of that sounds appealing to me. None of that sounds appealing to me at all. I want the charge controller to do everything itself. I don't want to have this Android device or some sort of mobile thing that goes onto it. Nor do I want to have to tell people, yeah, every time you want to go mess with the charge controller, just download this app and go pair. What a pain. So I looked at it and I immediately rejected it and thought, not going that route. Landed on the Renogy, ordered the Renogy. Then I got back to the nerds on the internet and I said, hey, here are some of my concerns with this Victron controller. It's great. Seems like it's super reliable. I'm getting the same answer from everyone, but what if I'm not going to use the app? Then what? And the answer turned out to be a much more interesting rabbit hole than I would have initially anticipated. The answer looks something like this. Victron actually has a commitment to open source. They're actually really dedicated to the concept of open source and want you to use open source things. They're very proud of the work that they contribute to open source. And so their charge controller, which again, typically works off of a little Bluetooth module that pairs to an app, also has the ability to work through CAN bus. Now, if you're not familiar with CAN bus, it's a really brain-dead simple technology that is effectively a glorified version of an Ethernet cable and a serial cable combined, if I was to try to summarize that in an easy-to-digest way. The mixer board in front of me that produces this show faithfully every single week and has since 2017 runs on a big CAN bus cable. And the idea is that the engine, the core, as they call it because they're clever, fancy people at Axia, runs all inside of a rack. And that's where all of the actual audio engine and mixing and all the analogs ins and out and all the things. And what sits in front of me is really nothing more than a glorified USB keyboard and mouse that has faders and meters and all of the things. That runs over a CAN bus cable back to the engine. And so no matter where I am and no matter what I'm doing, I just need to get a CAN bus cable and plug in the control surface and Bob's your uncle, I'm on the air. It's great. Works great. And it's been, again, rock solid since 2017. I have no complaints. Turns out the Victron Energy charge controller leverages the same system or the same technology. And so it also has the ability to talk over a CAN bus cable. Now, what to put at the other end? Couple different choices there. If you're going for out of the box and you just want to buy something and plug it in, they sell a controller that has everything that you need automatically built in. Runs its own little, OS and the whole nine yards. It is called the, do I have it here? The GX. And effectively what it does, it's a little box that you connect via CAN bus to their charge controller, and the GX gives you monitoring and control via network. And so it does what the SolarPoint did by way of, you have a little web interface, you can control all the things, you can monitor all the things, but it's that on steroids. So insofar as it exposes all of that to whatever other thing you want. The other thing I really like about it right off the bat, there aren't any connectors. So one of the things that bit me on the SolarPoint is the panels typically come with something called MC4 connectors, and that's what's typically used for solar panels to connect into the charge controller. The problem is you have to buy special crimpers and you have to buy special ends, which I did. But it means every time you want to service or do something with the solar controller, you got to go have all these special tools and all these special doohickeys. The thing that really appeals to me about the Victron system is that it's all bare wire ends. So you take a little screw, you open it up, you stick the wires in, Bob's your uncle, you're connected. So I actually like that mentality a lot better. And then you add the fact that it's a rock solid controller, CAN bus over to a separate unit. So now you're divorcing yourself of this spork idea where everything's all in one. No, the charge controller does one thing. It manages the voltage coming in from the PV cells and it charges the battery and monitors that. You want to do monitoring and control? Great, there's a box for that. And you plug that in, connect it with the CAN bus cable, connect it to your network, and now you have network control. If that box fails, so if I have the same problem that I was having with the solar point, that is to say it's not passing network traffic, oh well, the charge controller portion of it is still working. I can disconnect the GX control module and replace that without ever taking the solar system offline. As it stands today, the boat that I'm going to run into is Ubiquity wants the solar point back within 10 days of filing the RMA. They're not going to send me the replacement until it gets here. So I had no choice but to go buy something else, in my case, the Renergy, and I'm going to swap that in. Then I'll pull the solar point out, try to get that back to them before the time period runs out. Then they'll give me the replacement. And then I can carry on with the R&D process of figuring out what took that thing down in the first place, or is it a badly designed product? Did I do something wrong? Did somebody spit on it? I don't know, but I'll find out. All that to say, I have a new profound respect for Victron. Then I dug a little bit further. So what if you don't want to buy the GX? Well, it turns out Victron, in their commitment to open source, releases the operating system that runs on the GX. They call it Venus OS. And it turns out they have instructions and they will allow you to run Venus OS on a Raspberry Pi. Additionally, they make cables that you can use to interface their charge controllers to your home-built Venus OS box. And so if you wanted to do it yourself, if you're in the boat where you want to build it yourself, Victron's your choice. If you're in the boat where you want to do it professionally and you want a thing that you can buy out of a box and just plug all the things in. Now again, their charge controller, I was looking at the 150, the Victron Energy MPPT charge controller 150 is $516. Okay. The Victron Serbo GX is another $247. So you are spending some significant money to get there. Okay. You're spending $750 some dollars to get everything that you need. Now that's a drastically higher price point than the solar point's $150 or $200 or whatever it was. It's a much higher price point than the $150 Renergy or whatever it is. But I would tell you that in the end, first of all, you're supporting a company that supports open source standards. Second part is you're getting a way more reliable system. Third part is you're getting a system that can interface with a whole bunch of other things. Again, as I begun to dig down this rabbit hole and ask the nerds in my life, the answer that I got back is, hey, Noah, if you're just doing a few panels, you're just running a few devices, you'll be fine with whatever Chinesium, and that's what I'm told the Renergy is. It's one step above Chinesium. That's what you're going to get, and that'll work just fine. As soon as you want a more complicated system, as soon as you want to get more sophisticated, as soon as you want to start doing more, you're going to start to hit some roadblocks. And the Victron system is built to handle those roadblocks. It's built to manage a whole bunch of devices. And so if you buy the Victron Serbo GX, you can interface it with not just one, but many of their products to create a seamless experience.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of May 11th, 2025, here's the Linux and open source news. Calibre 8.4 is out. Nmap 7.96 has been released. The graphics stack Mesa has announced version 25.1. The 6.15 kernel is taking shape, and it looks like it will eliminate support for Intel's 486 chips and its contemporaries. In distro news, the Japanese distro Plomo Linux 8.2 is available. Ubuntu is adopting the Rust rewrite of sudo for Ubuntu 25.10. OpenSUSE has removed Deepin Desktop from their repos for claimed package policy violations. And Fedora 42 is now an official Windows Subsystem for Linux 2 distribution. In security news, a new campaign employing clickfix attacks have been spotted targeting both Windows and Linux systems using instructions that make infections on either operating system possible. Unlike other VPN companies that provide a GUI for Mac and Windows but leave Linux users to use the command line, NordVPN has released a full GUI for Linux. And fake AI-powered video generation tools are being used to distribute a new information steering malware family called Noodlefile, under the guise of generated media content. In other open source AI news, Hugging Face has acquired Pollen Robotics, a French startup that developed the humanoid 2 robot Ricci 2. The acquisition aims to make robotics more accessible by open sourcing the robot's design and allowing developers to modify and improve its code. The University of California, Santa Cruz has announced the release of OpenVision, a family of vision encoders that aim to provide a new alternative to models, including OpenAI's 4-year-old CLIP and last year's Google's SIGLIP. And lastly, OpenWebUI, a web app for LLM chat, has changed their license to prohibit use of any code without including their branding.
One of the things that I've been exploring for some time is this concept of minimalism. And specifically, I would tell you it probably started right before the pandemic, insofar as I had a really nice desktop, I had a really nice working environment, a nice everything. And I hit a point where I was going to be spending copious amounts of time in my home lab. And that caused me to reevaluate, well, if I was going to do this, how would I do it differently, so on and so forth. And eventually what I landed on is, while I'm at home, everything's fine. Second I go out on the road, it's difficult to go back. It's difficult to go back to working off of a laptop. And so that started me down this path of this minimum viable battle station. What's the minimum equipment that I need to be able to get a display in front of my face so that my neck isn't craned down, so that I'm using biomechanically correct positioning, that I can see what I'm working on, that sort of thing, right? That led me down a rabbit hole to realize, well, if it works at client locations and it works at an office and works at, why would I need anything more at home? And so over time, it actually had the opposite effect. Instead of going in to get the ultimate station, to get everything dialed in, it turned into, what's the absolute minimum I can get away with? For a time period then, shortly after that, I started to dig into Tails. Tails, if you're not familiar with it, is an amnesic operating system, and it's wonderful for doing things like providing an imposed handicap. So for almost 2 months, everything I did, I forced myself to do from a live environment in Tails. And if I couldn't do that, I made note of, hey, here's a process, here's a software, here's a thing that requires me to have, and then I outline that. So the concept was, here's what I need to accomplish in my personal life or be able to need to do on a laptop. Here's what I need to be able to do in my professional life, and where are the boundaries? And it turns out you can get way further than that than I would have ever thought imaginable. As I kind of returned to a more normal way of doing things, I didn't want to abandon the concept of reproducibility. One of the nice things about doing everything in Tails is that your entire workflow is reproducible. It has to be by nature because you are literally reproducing it every time you restart the computer. So it forced me into a habit of reproducibility. When I went back, I said, I'm not willing to divorce that concept. So to split the difference, I set myself up my Arch workstation and I configured the entire thing using an Ansible playbook. The idea being that if it ran this time, I could reload the laptop any time of my choosing and I'd be able to get right back to where I was. And so I haven't really gone away from that. Every 2-3 months now, I blow my computer away, not because there's anything wrong with it, not because nothing works, and I reload it and I run the playbook, and time again, it's proof to myself more than anything else that if you give me a piece of hardware, a piece of x86 hardware, I need 2 flash drives, and with those 2 flash drives and a little bit of time, I will be able to transform any piece of x86 hardware that you give me back into a usable workstation for myself. And that proved this concept of reproducibility, and I've embraced it, and I've been living it ever since. Fast forward to Linux West Northwest. Again, you can go back and listen to the interview with Olympia. Mike hands me this laptop, has NixOS. It appeals to me because it's a declarative system, but I've not really had any time to play with it. Spend some time in the airport, fall down the rabbit hole. Okay, all that's 2 episodes ago. You want to go listen to the full version. So I eventually stubbed my toe insofar as I locked myself out of the computer. Long story, decided to reload. So go download NixOS, fresh install. So this time, I started with the GNOME desktop environment and none of Olympia Mike's packaging, none of his customizations. It's just stock NixOS with a GNOME desktop. Swapped the GNOME desktop out with i3, and I've been working my way through that ever since. Now, here's where I'm stubbing my toe and where I could use some help. Got the system reloaded, no problem. Basic i3 system working, no problem. Things I'm struggling with. I don't have any way to auto-mount USB drives. So this came to my attention because the first thing I wanted to do was back up my i3 config and back up my Nix config. And so I plugged a little flash drive in to try to copy the data off of it. And lo and behold, I found that I can't mount the USB. It doesn't automatically mount. Found a little utility that has a little checkbox. It says, auto mount USB, not working. So if you can help a brother out, send me your Nix config, particularly if you're using it with i3. How did you get that to work? Here's the second thing that I've stubbed my toe on. Dark theme. Probably sounds stupid to some of you, but I have to have a dark theme. And I've tried various different, I tried installing the GTK themer. I tried the XFCE theme setting. I'm doing something wrong. I'm convinced it's my problem. As I started to dig into it a little bit further, I'm learning that there are ways to specify the dark theme from within NixOS itself. So I'm asking for a little help. If you know how to fix that, or you have a place to at least get me started, I would deeply appreciate your help. Live at AskNoahShow.com. I'm with Niels Bushnell, and he is on the Ubuntu Matrix Council. So take me back, Niels, if you would, to the first time you started using Matrix. When did you discover it? And what were your initial impressions? What kind of drew you to it to say, this is kind of a cool way to do messaging?
I think it was a friend of mine. I don't remember the name. It was a few years back. I think it was at the beginning of Matrix. Nobody was using it, so that was like new thing. So I just stumbled in there. I think it was the web version. I started first, and I joined some rooms, and I found out, okay, this is not only one server, there are multiple servers, and there's federation, and it was all very exciting. And so I just landed on Matrix, and then I learned about the bridges, and I learned how I can connect my Telegram and my WhatsApp account that I was still using back then. Tried to getting off that. Yeah, and then at some point I landed at the Ubuntu support room that was kind of full of spam and unmaintained at that point. And we asked the Matrix operators if we could add us as temporary admin so we can at least clear up things. And then we forward almost 2 years, I guess, 1.5 maybe. And someone from the community team, Merlin, came to the room and asked me if I would support the Ubuntu effort to create a Matrix community space.
So talk to me about the Canonical / the Ubuntu effort. So they're sitting down, they're looking at the community, they're saying, this is fragmented, it's kind of all over the place. You've got this platform over here and that platform over there. IRC has been drugged, kicking and screaming into 2020, I guess at this point 2023, and we're looking over and we're saying, what technology is going to exist in 10 years, 15 years, 25 years that we could invest in today and that will be available tomorrow? What did that conversation look like? And then what were the practical steps that you went about to get a server running under the Ubuntu name?
Well, to the platform stuff, that still exists. I mean, IRC has been around for Ubuntu for forever, as long as I can think of anyway. And I don't think it will continue to exist beside Matrix. We are still, discussing merging them with a bridge, but that's to be done yet. And to me, Matrix is always the best platform of all, of course, because I love Matrix. But I can tell you if Matrix is the ultimate solution for the next 5, 10 or whatever years, I don't know. If something really much cooler comes along, we may switch. It's nothing, but it's the cool thing at the moment, and it works very well for us, especially because we can connect to the other communities like KDE, Fedora, Mozilla. Everything is on Matrix, so it's really easy to get in touch with the other open source projects. So that's awesome. I actually started with my own home server, so it wasn't mine. So I learned setting up the server myself, actually. And the community server is hosted by Canonical, with my colleague Gregory. He's also on the council. He did the workshop with us today, on day 2 this morning. So they manage all the infrastructure stuff for us. We can have suggestions and fixes. That's all cool. It's also, everything is on GitHub. So if you want to set up your own Matrix server with Juju, then you can go to the Canonical GitHub. I think it's Synapse operator. You can clone it and spin up your own Matrix infrastructure.
Do you think Juju is the easiest way for somebody who maybe doesn't have a lot of experience with Synapse or with Matrix to get that up and running, or does that provide some challenges?
If you are already using Juju, yes. If not, probably not the easiest way. There's a much easier way. They offer Debian packages actually. So if you just want to do it on your Pi or whatever, it's all Python, so you can just clone the repository and run it up. You need no cloud or anything for that. So if you just want to get started, I would recommend at least a Pi 4, maybe, if you just want to get things started.
What has the reception been like, both from Canonical and the wider Ubuntu community? You've placed this new thing on the planet. Obviously, there are going to be a variety of opinions. There are going to be a variety of experiences. How has the reception looked?
I think the reception is positive overall. If you are in Matrix, usually you like Matrix, so might be a bit biased here with all the community, but so many community rooms from ISC migrated or new rooms existed. We are a few hundred rooms, could be 1,000 already, and a few thousand users already. So I think everybody likes it. It's not perfect, the client is not perfect, and there are always smaller things that always can get improved. But my personal opinion is it's already, from the start, so much better than ISC. So everybody can join together, and I think it's an awesome experience so far.
Can you tell me what some of those pain points are? Where do you think there's some, I'm going to phrase it like this, where do you think there are some opportunities for growth, both for Matrix and for the clients?
For Matrix protocol is pretty flexible, and it's always improving, so I think that's not thing I worry about, because they're always improving, they're getting updates. Another pointer to the talk from Matthew on the first day, he explained all the future of Matrix, so if you want to get all the new exciting things that are happening in Matrix, go watch the talk, it's awesome. From the client side, yes, there's some user experience stuff, like how the threads are handled. You can have threaded conversations and how that's displayed, how you can search in threads, how you get notifications in the thread, and you get to the right point in that. There's a small user experience stuff that can always be improved. But I think they're getting there, so yeah.
We're about, I think, a little over a year into the official Ubuntu server. What do you think that looks like over the next year? What are your goals? What are kind of the next steps as you move towards solidifying the base that you've started?
Right now we have some stability issues sometimes with the server, but that's mostly infrastructure stuff, so it's not only Synapse. Discourse has the same problems. The problem with Synapse is that it's not really a high availability compatible application at the moment. If you run it in the cloud and you try to scale it, it's not perfect at the moment. So we're looking into that to make it more stable. It's our first step right now, to make it rock stable. Maybe switch to another home server software later, but that's a long-term goal. And the next thing is maybe that ISC bridge to add later. And also we're looking to add more workers and just making the overall experience better and faster. That's the first thing. But stability is step one at the moment.
Have you stuck mostly to the mainstream clients? Do you use Element on a day-to-day basis, or are there other clients that you've explored that you think show some real potential? I'd be particularly interested if there is a native client that's kind of caught your attention that you go, man, that gives me the Matrix-like experience that I'm looking for, but in a native package as opposed to a web-wrapped thing.
I myself mostly use Element, yes, but that's because it's a reference implementation and it always has the latest stuff and features enabled, so that's why I stick to that, to try the new stuff. There are cool other clients. I actually have my Ubuntu Touch phone. There is a web version of Element, but that's really slow, so there is Cine on that. I would like to have more updates on that. I would actually have to reach out to the developer just to ask what's going on there. I like it, but it lacks some updates. So for Ubuntu Touch, Cine is nice. Then I think a lot of more experienced users like Nico. That's a very future-rich and it has extensive dev tools, and you can get really into the inner things of Matrix. Then I tried NeoChat. That's also kind of cool. But I think there's somewhere online like a matrix of all the features and the different clients, and you can compare it. And the thing is, if you find a client that has the features you need, it may be good for you and an alternative. But you always have all the check marks on Element that always works everything, and then you have to really see for yourself what you don't need and what other client may be good for you. I use Element mostly.
Could you speak a little bit to the concept of the network effect? So that is to say, the argument against Matrix is going to be, wow, there are tens of thousands or millions of people that are using Discord. Why wouldn't we just give up this idea of self-hosting a server and just create an account on Discord and move everybody over there? That's where all the people are. Is that maybe a better chat platform if that's where the people are?
Yes, but the thing is, our people mostly are on Matrix. And, of course, we want it open source. Discord, it works most of the time, I think. I use it sometimes, not that often. But as I said before, all the open source projects like KDE, Fedora, Ubuntu, all the big players of open source are already on Matrix, and they prefer to use Matrix because I think from a Ubuntu standpoint it would be strange to say, hey, we're on this proprietary platform now. So for us we thought about alternatives, of course. But Matrix is the only federated open source software that we can contribute to, and we are looking into contributing more to the ecosystem. So that was the only good choice for us, really. Yeah.
Do you ever see a time in where there will be a native client that ships with Ubuntu? I think KDE is shipping with NeoChat, or some opinionated distributions are doing that. Do you see a time as that becomes kind of the de facto standard in the open source world to where we say, okay, if we're going to release a distro, part of it is going to be a web browser, the other part is going to be we're going to have a chat client and it's going to support something like Matrix?
I'm not sure if I'm correct, but I think Mint in the latest version shipped a Matrix client, right? Yeah, okay. Yes, that would be our goal, of course. Right now, we don't even ship the IRC client. That was the old communication tool for Ubuntu. But I would really love to see, like, at least in the installation process, after the installation, the pop-up that shows you how to get into Ubuntu, I would love to have an extra slide that says, hey, here's your link to Matrix. I would, of course, love to have the client pre-installed, but I'm not sure if we're getting through that anytime soon. I hope so, but I would really like that you just maybe even have a desktop icon. You can just, hey, get in touch with us here. You click on it, you join the support room, and you're there. That would be awesome, yes, sure.
Niels, I appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us. We'll get you back on the program soon.
Thank you.
I'm going to encourage you to use me as a petri dish. There's a number of different organizations with different ways of dealing with reproducibility. So NixOS, if you want the most precise tool, you want to get exactly the same thing every single time. Ansible, if you want the widest reaching hammer, where it will hit every nail you throw at it. Then there's Juju and Charms. You heard it referenced from Nils when he was talking about the Ubuntu Matrix community. Listen up about Charms. I'm here with Merlin Sebrex, and we're talking about Jujus and Charms. And Merlin, I think you just gave me the most eloquent, succinct explanation of Juju and Charms I think I've ever heard. So we were talking a little bit about the comparison and contrasting of Juju versus Ansible and Helm and those sorts of things. Can you tell me what makes it different?
So, what makes Juju different from those other configuration management tools is that Juju is the first tool that actually has the concept of an abstraction. So how you have, like in irregular programming, building a regular application, you're using a bunch of libraries, and all these libraries hide the underlying complexity of what they're doing. Juju is actually the first configuration management tool that allows you to build an abstraction. And this abstraction is a charm. So the reason why this is interesting is because it makes sharing code with other people, sharing automation code, a lot easier. If you use a tool like Ansible or Helm, if you want to reuse code from somebody else, You basically have two options. Either you take their code, you look at the code, you try to understand it, and you change the code itself, or you take their code and you just deploy it as is without any changes. While with Juju allows you to like encapsulate your automation code under an abstraction very similar to a library, where if somebody else gives you code inside of a charm, this charm presents to the system administrator a much higher level API that hides the complexity of actually setting up that application. Let's say, for example, I want to have an application, a web server that connects to a database. With Juju, I basically say to the configuration tool, okay, give me a web server, give me a database, and now connect these two. And then the underlying automation code will figure out what does it actually mean to connect a web server to a database. The underlying automation code will, first of all, look at, okay, which database am I connected to? What configuration files do I need to change in order to connect to that specific database? And it will do that without the system administrator themselves having to know which values to change in this automation code in order to connect it to that database.
So you wrote your thesis on the ability to, or on delivering applications, a different way of delivering. Do you see Juju and Charms as a means to an end for that purpose?
So Juju and Charms are incredibly useful when the application that you want to deploy is, first of all, incredibly complex, something like a Kubernetes cluster or an incredibly advanced machine learning framework. And secondly, it also has to be something that is very extensible. If you look at Kubernetes, for example, Juju has a lot of great charms to deploy Kubernetes, but in Kubernetes you can customize almost any part. The problem is that if you deploy it with Ansible, it's incredibly difficult to, when you get certain code that deploys Kubernetes with a certain container framework like Docker, and you want to add another container framework like Containerd, then you basically have to dive into the code in order to change all the values you need in order to connect it to Containerd instead of to Docker itself. Whereas with Juju, this is just a charm. The container runtime is a charm that you connect to your other charms that deploy your Kubernetes cluster. And if you want to change your container runtime, you just remove the charm of the old container runtime, put in the charm of the new container runtime, connect this to Kubernetes, and then the cluster itself will decide, okay, now which things do I have to change in order to use this new container runtime instead of the old one. I have to admit, Juju is quite a complex tool in order to use, and that's why I personally mostly recommend it when the complexity of your application is at such a level that it's incredibly difficult for a single system administrator to completely understand everything that's going on. Because while Ansible, a tool like Ansible is great for, first of all, scaling. If you have a single system administrator that knows how to deploy everything, then using Ansible, the sysadmin can do it on 10,000 servers very easily. And then secondly, Ansible is also very useful for reliability or basically knowing what's deployed. With Ansible, you know that on all the servers, it's exactly the same thing that's being deployed. While you still need a sysadmin that understands the application well enough in order to actually either write the playbooks or understand the playbooks enough in order to use them. Whereas with Juju, because you have these abstractions, you can very easily use it to deploy applications where you as a sysadmin don't entirely understand how it works, how to deploy it. And so that's where, in my opinion, Juju really shines.
Do you think that that poses a problem by way of long-term maintaining? If I'm a system administrator and I don't understand necessarily the ins or outs, and it feels like magic or a charm, right? That this thing just kind of appears. Does it pose a challenge by way of troubleshooting or maintaining long-term to keep the thing running, or do you think that that's a misguided concern?
So that's definitely a good concern, and like from a big picture perspective, this is basically the exact same issue we have with normal libraries. If you look at curl, for example, curl is a library. When something goes wrong inside of curl, most app developers have no idea how to fix it. They need other people in order to fix it. This is the same with some of these charms. If something goes wrong inside of a charm, it's incredibly difficult to fix it without having more intimate knowledge of how these charms work, of how the application itself works. And in that sense, yes. In that sense, if you have the capacity in order to understand everything completely, it might be better to use another tool. But the reality is that there's a lot more companies and sysadmins that want to use Kubernetes than companies and sysadmins that have the capacity to completely understand Kubernetes. And so for a lot of companies, I don't think they even have they don't even have the choice between using something where they need to understand it completely, because for them it's a choice between using Juju and not using it. Then I also want to add that this is the exact same problem that we have in regular software development. And so now that this idea of an abstraction is introduced into configuration management, we're seeing the field of configuration management slowly figuring out how to do this well, how to do abstractions well, how to write better charms so that people don't shoot themselves in the foot with these abstractions. Like, it's very easy to create a bad abstraction, but as a field, we're slowly figuring out how to do this. And so I'm quite sure that right now, most of these charms are already a lot better than what we had 5 years ago. And then in 10 years, the situation will be even better, simply because we're now progressing this field, basically.
So I'm going to continue to implore you to use me as a petri dish. Look at what works well for me, look at what doesn't. And so what I found, thus far what I've learned, is that Ansible is the largest hitting hammer. There isn't a piece of equipment that supports SSH in the last 10, 15, 20 years that I haven't been able to use Ansible or make Ansible work for me. At the same time, I've also stubbed my toe a little bit, right? So we had a technician go out and try to replace some software that was running on a Raspberry Pi. And what happened was the library for Python that was running on the Pi was older than the library then required for Ansible running on the host machine. And so the automation broke. And so it isn't if it works once, it works forever. It is an administration tool that can be used to save time, but you have to use it in the appropriate way. NixOS, on the other hand, it's less about an administration tool and more about a way of reproducing the exact same system every time. And Juju Charms, the only system that I'm aware of that is truly kind of a hands-off white glove approach. Music in my ears means we're out of time. I thank you for joining us. You can catch the entire backlog at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Follow me, noahc.us. We're back next week, 6 p.m. Central, asknoahshow.com.